Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Anxiety Chats. Today, we are joined by Krista, an OCD advocate and founder of ICT OCD Alliance. Welcome, Krista. And maybe you can start by telling us what ICT OCD Alliance is.
So, I'm actually incredibly flattered that that's the one that you brought up. I love that because I do have my own clinic in Wichita, Kansas. So what ICT OCD Alliance is it's something that myself and actually a few other clinicians had the idea of during the pandemic. Is we were noticing that, especially with the pandemic, that there was such an increase and such a need for OCD specialists. And unfortunately, in behavioral health, because it's very much the wild, wild west, it's very much kind of unruly that anybody can say that they treat anything. And, we don't have board certifications to really protect that. And so specialists are, you kind of almost just crossing your fingers like, oh, I really hope this person treats the thing that I have. And we were noticing that we were using each other to network quite a bit because there's not a lot of us. And at the time, there were only like 5 of us that in the area that treated OCD. Since then, we've kind of grown. But the whole point is it's a grassroots alliance of clinicians who our whole purpose is when people are suffering from either obsessive compulsive disorder, body focused repetitive behavior, or body dysmorphic disorder, like here are your local experts. Even though, you might do a quick Google search as to where can I find somebody, we're trying to consolidate everything. And what we've noticed is a lot more people are getting help a lot sooner. And now doctors and therapists and schools are even using us as a referral basis. And it's just amazing.
That's so cool. And it's something that's interesting that you don't necessarily go to the same therapist or like practitioner for any mental health problem. Maybe it might work for some people, but for me, I went to like anxiety specialists and I went to talking therapy and stuff. And then I went to an OCD specialist and it actually did really help.
Yeah.
Because they are trained in that exact OCD's a really, oh my God, it's like a really massive subject. I don't think people realize. I don't think I realized until I started doing this podcast. So many people have OCD and it's something that's just so heady, isn't it? It's so and it's so hard to explain to people and it's like just so big.
It is. And I really am hoping that, especially in my lifetime, I'm really hoping that they get some type of board certifications in behavioral health. Because one of the things I tell people frequently is, if you have cancer, do you go to a cardiologist? Are you going to a gastroenterologist to have your baby delivered? No, because these are specialists. They have very certain skills that they have devoted their entire career to. Why don't we have this in behavioral health? I really feel that is. I'm gonna go for the gut here. I actually think it's harming people that we don't have those, and it makes people, well, like you and I, search for a very long time for a therapist that can really help us. And by the time you do find an OCD specialist, you have a guard. You already don't trust them because it's like, cool.
Yeah.
The last 5 people told me they can treat this disorder. What's different about you?
Totally. And so what is your personal experience of OCD?
Oh, boy. So I always feel like that's such a loaded question because it is, because OCD it's loaded. I remember my first experience when I was 5, and when I was a kid, it really presented a lot of mental compulsions. So many mental compulsions. I would get stuck, and in fact, I look at previous report cards of myself growing up, and it constantly said stuff along the lines of, Krista does not read the directions. Krista does not follow the directions. Krista is spacey and all this. And I'm thinking, man, I would have gotten diagnosed with ADHD and I would have put on stimulants when in reality, I literally remember so distinctly as a child just daydreaming and being stuck on something And then somebody would bring my attention to, and like, hey, Krista, I'm like, oh, I'm in school right now. Oh, okay, hi. And it's absolutely bonkers to me because I was always viewed as being kind of like, oh, she's a daydreamer. When in reality, I'm like, oh, don't worry. I'm like protecting your lives with my brain right now. And I have to do this. Otherwise, the school's going to explode or something along the lines of that. So I really struggled in silence for quite a long time. And then when I was 24 is when I was diagnosed, kind of, because I went to a it was like a medication trial for generalized anxiety disorder, as I had been diagnosed that in college, even though it never really made sense. I was like, it takes me like 30 to 40 minutes to get dressed every day. Not because I'm anxious, it's because it doesn't feel right on my body. And if it doesn't feel right on my body, then I'm going to get fired or die or something. So that didn't seem anxious to me. It seemed totally unrelated. But I went to this trial and was kind of in a weird way diagnosed OCD. And I remember after that trying to find professionals. And the first one I went to really did a lot of harm for me because it was actually my first year as being a therapist. And I should note that I was diagnosed while I was in grad school with OCD. And when I went to my first therapist to specifically be treated for OCD, because as this therapist, he seemed to have all the right things on his website, which is also part of the reason why I am very much an advocate for stay within the scope of your practice, market what you're educated on. Don't just like throw out different disorders so you can fill up your hours in the daytime and make money, but actually, do what you're trained in. So at that time, I was treating more ages like 0 to 5, and a lot of my clients were survivors of sexual abuse. And I was terrified that I was going to re-traumatize these children, and I was going to lose control of my limbs, and I was going to molest these children. And I think, like a lot of people with OCD, I Googled the crap out of everything because I want to make sure I was not actually a pedophile because I was very terrified. And then I went to this therapist and I explained this to this therapist. And because I was a therapist at the time, I could tell he was doing a risk assessment of me. And he was making sure that I really wasn't actually going to be harming children. And then at the very end, he did one of the most harmful things that we know that you could do with somebody with OCD. And he said, oh, you're fine. You are not going to molest a child. Well, dude, harm was done. You did all this harm reduction stuff and all this risk assessment stuff. The entire hour completely disregarded everything. I didn't even have time to talk about my other obsessions because he fixated so much on the fact that I was terrified that I was going to molest these kids. And when I left, I'll never forget his receptionist said, would you like to schedule for next time? I literally said, hell no, because I was convinced that I was going to be arrested and I was going to lose my license, and I was newly married at the time, and that my husband was going to leave me because I'm a pedophile. I really truly believe that he didn't, that he made it worse. And that really set me into a pretty dark place for a while. And then I learned more about what actual OCD treatment was. And by that time, I had already been somewhat established in my community. So there were 2 OCD specialists in my community at that time, and I was friends with both of them. So can't go to them. And I learned how to treat OCD. And so while becoming an OCD specialist, I was also learning how to do the therapy on myself. Don't recommend that. It's a very hard way of recovery. It's a very longer road of recovery, I'll tell you that. But nevertheless, I'm glad that I did it because I think not only did it strengthen me as a human being, but I think it strengthened me as a clinician because, boy, I tell you, when you have to hold yourself accountable for the exposures that you have made upon yourself, the motivation and everything just increases. And I got better. In the process of me looking for some help, there was only 2 clinicians in Wichita who treated OCD, and I was already established in the community, and so I actually knew them. And that's not great because you can't work with people that you know. And I was also friends with them. That makes it even more challenging. But from them, I learned what actual OCD treatment was. And so I learned more about exposure and response prevention therapy. And so while I was learning how to do ERP as a clinician, I was actually using ERP on myself. And it's a lot harder and a longer road of recovery to do that. However, I didn't view it as a choice because I had already gone to 4 or 5 therapists at that time and they all lied to me. And so I gave it a go. I gave it a shot and I'm a lot better today because of that. I would not recommend that route. And fortunately, I've talked to a lot of OCD clinicians who have OCD that unfortunately have also had to go that route too. It sucks, but desperate times, man.
Yeah, I do. I certainly do. Like, and you talked about something we've not talked about in this podcast before, and I think yeah, you probably would agree that a lot of mental health conversation online can be quite fluffy, maybe, and quite light, and they don't really want to go into it too much. And I understand that perspective, but I think it's really important to talk about what you're talking about, which is some people with OCD actually believing that they're a paedophile. Some people with OCD believing that they'll have relationships with their parents. All of these things are so distressing and make you believe, of course, make you believe you're not a good person. Maybe it's true. And is there a name for that type of OCD?
So when you have thoughts like that, a lot of times people might separate them into like sexually intrusive obsessions. I kind of use the term, and this is not like a clinical term. This is just kind of what I use, is I just use intrusive attractions. And that I find to be something that really just kind of clumps up a bunch of different things, because people can also be intrusively attracted to pets. So, along the lines of like, what is it? Zoophilia or beastophilia or, oh my gosh. What is that called?
What is that
The
called?
fear of having sex with, oh no, that word literally just left my brain. Bestiality, that's it. I was like, oh gosh, I know it's beast. And then there's also what's called objectophilia, which is being attracted to inanimate objects. And that's another thing a lot of times people don't talk about in this community. And so it's really interesting that there's even like taboo amongst the taboo in this community, and intrusive attractions are absolutely one for sure.
Yeah, there is. And I think for me, I never had compulsion. I mean, all OCD is really brutal when you're going through it. But I think there's an even more difficult time for people that are having OCD around things that are already taboo subjects, like sex and masturbation and all these kinds of things. And they're already embarrassing things to talk about. So when you're talking about that in relation to OCD, I just imagine that's so, so difficult. So what are some other taboos surrounding OCD that are important for you to talk about, do you think? You talk about a lot of taboos on Instagram, and I love it.
I do. Thank you. And honestly, I think that has just been something that I have been accustomed to doing almost my entire life. I'm going to give you a kind of a silly example. This is going to be 7th grade Krista, and this is going to give you kind of a nutshell idea of like who I am as a person. Is I've never understood why things are taboo. I've never understood that. And I remember when I was in 7th grade and I was sick and I had the stomach bug. And of course, when you have the stomach bug, things are coming out both ways. Super fun. But tell me a person that hasn't thrown up or has had diarrhea. Like, let's be real about this. Very normal function. And when you got a bug, your body's like, get this out of me. And so I was in 7th grade, which is a super great time to talk about having diarrhea because it's not an awkward time in your life at all, middle school. And I was telling people, I was like, yeah, diarrhea. And I got made fun of so bad for that. And I remember thinking, like, you all have that. Like, you all poop, right? it's not just me, right? And I'm still to this day, I'm like, why is that something? I'm not talking about it like at the dinner. Like, I know that it's gross. Like, we don't have to argue about the fact that it's like gross or not, but why do we make that such a taboo? I've never understood that. And so going more into OCD and realizing that there is parts of OCD that are taboo, I was like, that is why is there stigma within the stigma? Why is there taboo within the taboo? Like, why are people not talking about this kind of thing? Like, why is it as a society they deem it, oh, it's okay for you to be afraid of being dirty and needing to wash your hands, but it is not okay for you to have thoughts of killing your spouse. When in reality, people who don't have OCD have had thoughts of rape, have had thoughts of committing a crime, have had thoughts of murder. And I don't mean on the regular, because I could absolutely see somebody, listening to this podcast saying, well, I haven't had those. They might be very fleeting thoughts. You might be watching a documentary about, something very hard and illegal and just against, humankind. And a thought might just pop in. But because you don't have OCD, it might not get stuck and it might just go away. These are very common thoughts to have because we're also very curious. Why is it that when you have a mental illness that is already so misunderstood and so misrepresented in our society, why do we have to even break it down to the point to where, hey, okay, so it's okay for you to have this, not this one. And when I'm talking about like these taboo ones, a lot of the time they're going to be things that you think of might be construed as being inappropriate, icky, illegal, harm to yourself, harm to other people, fear of being a harmful person. So like fear of like, what if I am a serial killer and I don't know it? What if I have killed people in the past? What if that person they're looking for on the news, the serial killer or whatever, the serial rapist, what if it's actually me and I don't remember doing it? The intrusive attraction piece. Relationship OCD is incredibly taboo. I think that's actually a taboo that's not talked about as much as being taboo. And that's having, intrusive thoughts of, what if I'm not attracted to my spouse? What if I am going to cheat on my spouse? What if my spouse cheats on me? And a lot of times people will say, well, those are just really natural thoughts. Those are normal thoughts. Well, they typically don't get stuck again with people who don't have OCD. And it's taboo because we also just kind of like brush it aside like it's not so much of a big deal. So taboo is really just all about whatever society deems as being abnormal or not okay. Oh, absolutely not. Oh, and let's talk about religious OCD. What if you are somebody that faith is incredibly important to, or maybe you're a priest or a minister or a preacher and you have OCD and you're having thoughts of, is God real? What if I am letting the parishioners down? What if I'm lying to them? That might be very difficult and very taboo for that religious leader to get help, especially inside of their community, because they might feel judged and they might feel like they're going to be ostracized. And so when you have those feelings of being ostracized or judged, that right there is taboo. We could go on about taboo stuff. We could talk about racism stuff and sexism stuff and a lot of that different kinds of stuff. Taboo is just whatever you goes along that lines of feeling judged. Whatever society seems as being like, oh, there's this OCD that we're okay about, but this is the one we're not okay about. And I hate that. So much.
I've always been the same of I don't quite understand why this, even without OCD, I don't quite understand why this is allowed to be talked about and this isn't allowed to be talked about. And it doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe that's a part of my OCD, I don't know. But what is it that's different about somebody with OCD? What is it that makes it, like you said, an average person could have a thought like, what if I just went up to that lady there and just like killed her? What is the difference with that and somebody with OCD? Like, how does it, what, is there something in the brain that makes it different?
Oh, yeah, there is. I mean, it's absolutely wired differently because we all have thoughts that we don't want. The person with OCD, it's just going to get stuck. It's just going to get stuck. And then they're going to doubt why that thought came into their brain to begin with. They're going to doubt the existence. They're going to doubt so many things about this thought being there. And well, maybe this thought, maybe there is some truth to this thought. I mean, it's my brain. And maybe this is who I am, and I just haven't accepted it yet. But again, because there's that doubt, it's not you're never fully bought in to your OCD thoughts. It might be that doubt of, well, maybe this is who I am, but it doesn't seem like that. Somebody who doesn't have OCD, who might have a very similar thought of, again, watching the documentary or watching like ID or any of these true crime, like, oh my gosh, what if I did that to my husband? Nah. No, fine. Person with OCD is like, ugh, could I be somebody that could do that? I mean, I see all these documentaries, I see all these true crime things where they're talking about, oh, and Mrs. Sanders, she seemed like she was just a lovely wife and so devoted until she killed her family. And it's like, oh, it's so dramatic. And it's like, context. There's always so much more. People just don't all of a sudden flip and like kill people. And maybe they do. I don't know. Weird stuff happens all the time.
It's interesting though, and I think it was important for people to know, like when I was going through OCD really badly, I kind of was like, I know this is OCD, but nobody once said to me, you do know that OCD doesn't mean fact. And that's why I needed somebody to say to me. I needed somebody to sit me down, and I think nobody just thought about it and say, this isn't true. And because nobody said it, I kind of thought, well, maybe I'm just like a chosen person from somewhere, and I've been asked to have this type of mind. And like, I didn't really believe that it was a mental health thing. I was like, no, I think I just have really great intuition. Intuition is something that I feel really conflicted about, because people often say, listen to your inner child or listen to your intuition. And it's like, my intuition is OCD. So like, I find spirituality sometimes quite difficult with OCD. Because it's like, I don't like, luck and things like that. Luck is also, my mum is somebody that salutes magpies and she believes in luck heavily. And it's like, that to me is OCD. I don't really see the difference, because my OCD also believes if I salute a plant, then I won't get sick or whatever. I don't see the difference.
OCD is absolutely wild, and trying to conceptualize OCD to somebody who doesn't have OCD or really doesn't understand what OCD is so interesting. Even talking about my own OCD, and I'll just flat out say I was never a hand washer. People lose their freaking minds, and they're like, well, do you even have it then? I'm like, that's cool, because that's nothing that my OCD... I mean, my OCD has literally thought that as well. It's like, because it can go meta, as we know, obsessing about obsessing. So when somebody says, well, do you actually have it? I don't know, maybe. Maybe I'm lying to... Maybe, you know what, Emily, maybe I'm lying to you right now. I don't have it. I don't know. Who cares? Whatever. I'm still going to live my life. OCD is so incredibly wild. Something I do want to differentiate a little bit is, this being anxiety checks, is a lot of times people see OCD as anxiety. Anxiety, I'm not going to sit here and say, it's not part of it. It absolutely is a part of it. But it's not the whole pie. It's like a piece, Because I especially like with some contamination stuff, like people might say, well, I'm not afraid of that. I don't think something like catastrophic is going to happen. It's just disgusting. I feel cringy. I feel gross. I don't like how that feels on my body. It's not immediately going to go to this, like, somebody's going to die, or I'm going to get sick, or the world's going to explode, or whatever. It just doesn't feel good. It's that disgust type stuff. It could also be sadness or anger or guilt. Oh, I think guilt and shame is something that's not talked enough about with OCD, to be honest with you. But how I conceptualize OCD, not just me, I mean, that's not my thing. This is how I should say OCD therapists will conceptualize OCD is anxiety is absolutely a part of it. But how you differentiate an obsession from a worry is what is called ego-syntonic or ego-dystonic. These are words that, it was funny enough, is if you're an OCD treatment and your OCD therapist hasn't mentioned that, I would I would question, are they an OCD therapist? Because that's such a big part of differentiating between an anxiety disorder and OCD. So an obsession, these could, and it's not just thoughts, they could be images in your mind, and they could also be physiological urges, like the groinial response. Like, what if I'm having, like I mentioned, like the pedophilia OCD? What if I'm around a child and I get a groinial response? Ooh. Does that mean I'm actually attracted to that child? That is an obsession, and it's going to bring up a compulsion, which I'll get to that here in a bit as well, just even kind of differentiating, or just even talking a little bit more about what compulsions are. But they're unwanted. They're nonsensical, like you talked about. Like, I could tell myself that this is not real, like this is silly, but it feels and it seems so hard that you kind of want to hang on to that because it's telling you something not so great's going to come out of the result if you don't do the compulsion. The ego dystonic it is outside of your personality. It does not make sense to that person. So for me, years ago, having fears that I was going to molest a child, quite frankly, actually makes sense to my OCD because I value human life. I love kids. Like, I'm the person at Thanksgiving meals. Like, I don't want to sit with the adults. They're talking about boring stuff. I want to sit with the kids because they're talking about dinosaurs and cartoons. And I'm like, that is how I want to eat my pumpkin pie, is with those conversations. I don't want to hear adult stuff. It's so boring. I want to talk about cool stuff. So it makes so much sense for my OCD to attack that because that's something I value. That's something that means a lot to me. So of course it's going to be like, ooh,
Yeah.
you're a pedophile. Now with anxiety, worries, the ego-syntonic, it's going to make sense to that person. You know, it might be about relationships or health, which of course OCD can attack on as well. But, you know, we're looking at the ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic. It's going to make sense to the person. So like something with a worry about health. You know what? You got, your doctor wants to talk to you about something they found in an MRI. You have actual evidence in the here and now to tell you that there is something that to be of concern about. That's a worry. OCD might say, I think I need to get an MRI because something's wrong with me. Even though there's absolutely nothing in the here and now that doesn't make any sense. It might just be like, what if I have cancer? I need to get this and this and this and this and this. And I need to check, and then I need to go to these doctors, and I'm going to do these Googles, and I'm going to get reassurance. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. A worry is going to be based off of something, and it's not going to feel like it's outside of who you are. But the interesting thing is that functionality between OCD and anxiety disorders, it's the same. It's all about being safe and protecting either yourself or your loved ones, bringing that distress down. But again, the main difference is ego-syntonic with anxiety disorders and ego-dystonic with OCD.
That makes so much sense. And I think so, like when somebody has, say, for example, because I've always thought kind of my OCD came because I was so unbelievably anxious that I needed something that made me feel like I was in control. And so I got all these thoughts, and then I was like, right, well, if I just do these compulsions, if I do all these things, then nothing bad will happen. So I'm in control again. What are your thoughts on how people, if somebody's listening to this right now and they were at that place I was in at one point and they feel like they can't function at all, they feel like they can't, you know, I remember at points I couldn't say certain words, I couldn't breathe in certain ways, I had to breathe in a certain pattern. You know, everything in your whole life can feel like it's ruled by OCD. It's like one of those things that I feel like you don't just have a little bit of OCD no matter what the misconceptions say. It feels like it's just a really brutal thing to go through. And so what would be the ways that you can start to recover from OCD? How can you start to get better? Can you get better? Is that another question?
So what I would tell them is, first of all, recovery is possible and an amazing thing, an absolutely amazing thing. Now, when we're looking at a mental illness, we don't say the word cure, we say managed. It's treatable. You might have a lapse, and I'll explain what a lapse is versus a relapse. So when you have gone through treatment and you are at a place where you feel like you're able to do the things that you want to do, the things that you value, the things that maybe OCD had taken away from you, what a beautiful spot to be. It does not take much. And I'm sure you can agree with this. It does not take much for me, this is actually what it feels like. For something to happen. And it literally feels like, this is going to be kind of graphic, but this is how it feels like for me. It literally feels like somebody has reached in my body and pulled out my entire skeletal system, because I am then stuck on the floor, because it literally just is like, here's this trigger. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. And the train has come and it has hit my entire body. And now I am stuck in an OCD lapse. But here's the thing. I have skills. I have things to help me through. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I never do compulsions. No, I do. I do. I don't do it anywhere near like I did 10, 15, 20 years ago. I might do a compulsion and then say, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait, what are you doing there? And sometimes I have to, on purpose, undo the compulsion, if that's even a possibility. But I always use my skills. And it's hard, but let me tell you what. A lapse is just a moment where you might have a little bit of a challenge with an OCD for, maybe minutes, hours, days, unfortunately, sometimes weeks. It depends how severe the lapse is. But it's not going to derail your life. And I want to say that again. It's not going to derail your life. A relapse is where you are back to a really, really tough place as if you hadn't had treatment, which absolutely can possible. It can be possible. There's no shame in saying, I need to go back to therapy or in an intensive outpatient facility or even residential. Because let's look at cancer. I'll just say it. Let's say the cancer comes back. Are you going to say, well, I already had treatment. I don't need to have it again. No, you still need to have it again. Your body has this. And that's why they say, it's in remission. It's not entirely gone. It's in remission, and it can have that possibility of coming back. And if it does, you have to do treatment again. And yet with cancer, we are so much more kinder and have more self-compassion for people that have when it comes back than we are something like OCD. But the thing is your brain is still wired that way. Yes, you are creating new pathways because our brains, the neuroplasticity, like all the plastic, and you're creating these beautiful pathways to help you towards recovery. But you will have a moment of, vulnerability, and it's going to be a challenge. But you have your skills. You have your skills. Something I do want to say also is, a lot of times with OCD, we might conceptualize it as, because it's really important in treatment to differentiate the self and the disorder. A lot of times people say, think of it as a bully, think of it as a monster, however you need to is totally fine. I think no matter what you conceptualize it as, keep in mind that it is gaslighting you. Interesting thing about the word gaslight, I think that it was the most Googled word in 2022, just to give you an idea about like how many more people are coming into terms with the term gaslight, which if people don't know is actually a play in like the 1930s that became a movie twice, first in the UK and then second in America. I'm such a film nerd. It's a great movie if anybody hasn't seen it. Ingrid Bergman wins an Oscar. It's called Gaslight. It's really good. But anyways, OCD is literally lying to you and making you believe it's lies. You're a bad person. You're a bad person. You're a bad person. Oh, maybe I am. It's constantly gaslighting you. And what we know from being gaslit is you can reverse that and you can be empowered and you could talk back against it. And let me tell you what, it feels kind of badass to do that.
Yeah, it does. And I was wondering what kind of things. So for today, for example, I had my first OCD thought for a really long time, and I was hanging up my washing and to dry, and it was like, if you don't hang it up over this certain part, this jumper, then you're going to get really sick and you're going to ruin everything, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't do it. I was like, that's not real. There's no logical way that I can get sick from hanging up a jumper. And this is the only way that I've found really helps. And sometimes for my partner to say, can you actually logically get sick from hanging up a jumper? No. That's my best way to cope. That's how I've found to really, really be able to feel better. Is there anything else you could say to yourself in those moments that can be helpful?
So something that, and I think this is also just part of my personality, but that's also the cool thing about recovery is you can find ways to use your personality. So it's not going to go against who you are. I'm just a really silly person. I don't take a lot of things too serious. And like with that one, for instance, what my brain immediately said was like, man, that sucks. You're going to get sick? Ugh. Hate that. You know what? Maybe you're going to need some medicine. Maybe you're going to have to call 911 later. Future Emily's problem, not current Emily's problem, but we're going to have to see. I also I've heard two different expressions. I've heard some people say hard lean-ins or heavy lean-ins. And that's where you really, really kind of like go like pretty like deep and dark with that one. So that could be something kind of like, I'm just going to like flop over the jumper and maybe it's going to land on the floor. And because it lands on the floor, then I'm going to die. No, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to die. And then my partner is going to have a new partner and they're going to live happily ever after. Proud of them. They're going to have such a good life without me. And that is a really, really hard thing, I realize, to say in those moments. But when you're using a little bit of dark humor, a little bit of satire, oh, your OCD hates that because it doesn't want you to have a skill of comedy. It wants you to be afraid. And what a beautifully empowering way to basically give it the middle finger and say, like, that's a cute thought, OCD. How original. Man, I really hope my partner even has kids with this person. Maybe they're gonna forget about me.
Yeah.
You know what? That
I
sucks.
have heard this too.
I've
heard this.
I'll be dead.
And it's cool. Because literally. But I love that as well because it's like, it is like saying like, I remember one therapist used that on me and I was like, I don't like this. They were like, okay, so what if you were trapped in this car and what if you were then sick and then you couldn't control it and what if you then swerved off the road and then you couldn't get home and, saying all of your worst nightmares. And it sounds like, I think you need to maybe be ready for that. You need to be at a certain point maybe in recovery because I think it was too new for me. I was still quite traumatized. So I needed a little bit more chill time for that. But like, it can be such a useful tool, like worry scripts, I think she called it.
Mm-hmm. Like using stuff along the lines of like imaginals or something like that. Hard lean-ins or heavy lean-ins, however you use them. I say typically I use hard lean-ins. They're not for everybody. And typically they're effective, after already using, evidence-based treatments for OCD for a while to kind of really help you because they can get very dark. I have realized that, if I have somebody who is already kind of on the lines of like some of that dark humor, like me, for instance, I picked it up right away because it's like, well, I already, in a really silly, because I'm a big old weirdo, I already like some of that stuff. Like, that's just kind of who I am. I watch and listen to like weird stuff that maybe some people kind of might be like, oh, I don't know about that. And that's part of my personality again. So doing that fit. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. But here's the thing, you don't have to. That's not the only thing to do. Sometimes you can simply just say, maybe, or we'll see. Like I mentioned before, one of my favorites is that's future me's problem. I'll deal with that if that comes. And that's not, going nurturing. That's also not going super hard. That's just saying, like, if I have to deal with that, then I'll deal with it at that time. It's not happening right now.
I love that. I love that so much. And this has been such a good conversation about OCD. It's been really in depth, and I think we've covered a lot. I'm really grateful for you coming on and talking about all of your expertise. And anyone listening, please go over, if you're suffering with OCD, please go over, follow Krista on all of her social medias, because there's a lot of really interesting and super helpful stuff and taboos that are really important to be talked about. I think anyone with OCD can find like a voice through Krista. And so thank you so much for doing that for the OCD community.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I have a lot of fun with my social media.
You do. And your outfits are always amazing.
Oh, thank you. I love a lot of color. And just a little side note, that was something that my OCD took away from me for a long time, was color, because color was bad. Color had special meaning. And I literally just decided, screw this. Like, I love being colorful. I love wearing the loudest, most ridiculous outfit that doesn't make sense to anybody. But that's who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let OCD tell me otherwise, because it feels good to me.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. It's about actually, because when you've suffered with OCD for a really long time, you can kind of forget what you actually like. It almost like OCD becomes the thing that makes all the decisions. And it's about kind of being like, well, if I could make the decision, what would that be? And then making that decision. It's about finding yourself again and what you love, and color. That's a beautiful thing to get back. I'm really glad that you did get that back.
Thank you. Me too. Felt good.
Yeah.
But Emily,
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a lot of
fun. I'm sorry about all the different challenges and everything that we've had with Wi-Fi. But
all good.
Thank you so much for this. This has been great.
Thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully see you again soon another time. And anyone listening, like I said, you can go over and see all Krista's lovely things that she's talking about. And also thanks for listening. If you would like to come on the podcast and chat with me, I would love that as well. Until next time, goodbye everybody.